afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to the Lubar Center, Marquette University Law School, Eckstein Hall. I'm Mike Goucher, and this is On the Issues, and today we are releasing the new Marquette University Law School poll. Joining us today to walk us through the numbers, as always, is the poll's director, Professor Charles Franklin, and we are delighted that all of you could be with us today for the release of the poll results. Charles, let's start off the way we always do. We talk about the sample when we were in the field, how many people we talked to, margin of error, those sorts of things.
Thank you all. Thanks for coming. It seems like it was just yesterday that we did this in October. So we were in the field February 25th through March 1st, so that was last week. We interviewed 800 registered voters, our normal sample size. The one thing that we're doing differently this year is we've upped the percentage of cell calls to 60% of the sample now. So that's, again, tracking what the federal statistics are on cell phone-only households. It seems to have very little discernible influence on the sample, I should say, because cells and landlines aren't as different as you think. But that said, we're right there where the federal statistics say the state is at this point. This gives us a margin of error for the entire sample of plus or minus 4.5%, which is right where we normally are. There is one thing that's different in this sample, and this is all spelled out in the press release that you can grab at the end. Some of the items we asked of only half the sample in order to make room so that we could get more items on the total survey. So for those half sample items, the margin of error is either 6.3 or 6.4%, depending on which half they were on. One half got 402 respondents, one half got 398, and between those difference of 4 is the rounding error for the decimal point, whether it's 0.3 or 0.4. But say 6.4, you're good. And we mention in the press release and list at the end which items were half and which one are full. I don't think it particularly matters for our purposes here today, exactly what those margins of error are. And we also asked about the primary races in the Democratic and Republican primaries. Those margins of error are much bigger because so many fewer people are voting, or at this point saying they're going to vote in those. For the Democratic primary, the margin of error is 7.1, and for the Republican primary, it's 8.2. And again, all of that is spelled out in the press release, so you can get the details there. So that's those details. Shall we do party ID?
Yeah, let's get into the composite of the sample. Always lots of questions about that. So let's begin by looking at how people identify themselves politically, Charles, and then we kind of say, well, which party are you closer to? Yep. So those are the leaners, as we call them.
Exactly. And so this is our composition of this sample. On the green, you see the current sample is 41% Republican, 45% Democratic. If we look across all of the polls we've done before now, that average has been 43 Republican, 47 Democrat. So you see they're both down about 2 points from what the long-term average is, but the gap between them is the same. Independents have pushed up just a little bit, about 2 points compared to the long-term. This is not unusual in a midterm environment. We see between elections a little bit of decline in party, a little bit of a rise in independents. But this is in line with what we normally see. Now, we see something a bit different, though, when we look at without the leaners. And this came up last time as well. In this sample, Republicans are 27% of those who say, I'm a Republican, not I'm an independent who leans Republican, but I'm a Republican, 27%. But Democrats are at 25%. So Republicans are right at their long-term average, but Democrats are down a bit, in fact, a fair bit, 6 points from what that long-term average is. We saw this same thing happen in the June sample, and if you go back and replay the videotape, you'll hear me say there that whether this is a blip or not, we'll have to wait and see. Well, we've now got a second sample, and it shows something of the same. So how can it be that we're a bit down on the pure Democrats, but we're still holding on the Dem plus leaners? and in fact have a Democratic advantage there. It's because more people are calling themselves Democratic leaners rather than pure Democrats in this sample, and that was also true back in June. Some of this has to do with the shifting relationship between education and partisanship, something that was certainly a big deal in the 2016 race, where people with less than college are now more apt to call themselves Republicans. People with more than college are more apt to call themselves Democrats. That's shifting the balance a little bit. And I was just saying to Mike, we'll do a deep dive on this coming up, not today, but coming up, because it's very interesting if this is really happening. But I think at the moment you'd like that with leaners +2 Dem, but with pure partisans +2 Republican in this particular sample.
Let's look at leaners over time, Charles, since we've begun polling back in 2012.
So this is our whole series, and you can see that the Democrats have held an advantage with a few individual samples where it tightened. Here's the 2016 election, and you can see that since then, with leaners, Dems dipped down a little bit, but have been flat in the last 2 samples. Republicans boosted up just a little bit after the election, but now have come down in a couple of samples. So with leaners, you know, maybe it's fluctuating. If you just look at here, that gap looks somewhat similar to what it has been, maybe a shade tighter. And a little bit of an increase of pure independents who say they're not closer to either of the 2 parties. But when we look at it without leaners, so now just looking at people who say they're purely partisan, the decline among Democrats is evident in 3 samples in a row, March, June, and now here. Republicans blipped up but now have come down as well, and you can see the gap between the 2 has remained the same over the last 8 months to a year. So a little bit of movement going on there. Take that into account. If you don't trust that result, add a couple of points to your favorite team, one way or another. Okay?
We're going to talk about Foxconn for a few minutes. There's not been a lot of polling, certainly not a lot of statewide polling done on Foxconn. I think there was a poll done by PPP, more of a Democratic-leaning firm back last year. Charles, we did a regional poll of Southeast Wisconsin on Foxconn, but not a lot of statewide polling. So to set the stage here, Foxconn, as everybody in this room knows, is this plan for the Taiwanese electronics giant Foxconn to locate a plant in Racine County, a $10 billion investment. The state is going to give Foxconn roughly $3 billion in subsidies. The goal of Foxconn is to create 13,000 jobs. They'll be making these flat screen panels that can be used in a variety of ways. So that's basically what the Foxconn project is. Let's begin with how people see this project, and again, statewide, Charles.
Sure. So this is statewide, and the first question we asked, do you think that over the long haul, the Foxconn project will return as much or more value than the state is putting into it, or do you believe that we're paying more than the plant is worth? Okay? So for brevity, worth it or not worth it. And what we get there is 38% say it's worth it, we'll get that much value back, but 49% say it's not worth it, will not pay that much. And a fairly substantial 13% say they don't know whether it will provide that much value.
Will Foxconn substantially improve the Milwaukee area's economy?
So clearly the plant's going to be just a little south of here. Clearly the regional impact will be concentrated here. Do people think the larger Milwaukee area is how we described it, not just Racine, but the larger Milwaukee area, will see substantial economic effects of Foxconn, or do you not believe the economic effects will be substantial? And here, most people believe that the region will benefit from the plant. 57% say that the region's economy will get a boost, and 35% don't think so, and now a somewhat smaller 8% say they don't know. So I want to pause for just a second and pit those two against each other. Some skepticism about whether this large investment will pay off, but majority recognition that this is likely to stimulate the regional economy here in the Southeast.
The question we asked was, well, whether or not businesses near you. So we're asking the respondents, would businesses near you benefit directly from the Foxconn project?
And the two parts, businesses near you, near where you live, and will they directly benefit from Foxconn? Because this has been an argument about the spin-off effects to other businesses. Proponents of Foxconn have talked about how this will be statewide and will benefit businesses wherever they are in the state. And here there's profound skepticism. Just 25% believe that businesses near them will directly benefit. 66% do not think that. And it's important to realize these numbers include people who live here in the Southeast, in the Milwaukee area, where they do believe that there will be overall local benefit. But I interpret this as saying, but they don't think the existing businesses in their area are going to benefit from it. Okay? And so there's a real limitation about whether people see this as helping their existing local businesses, whether they're living down here and those businesses are nearby Foxconn, or whether they're living in La Crosse and have a much more distant relationship. We'll break this out by region in a minute, so you'll see how those differ.
Charles, we also wanted to get at whether or not people have environmental concerns about the Foxconn plant.
So the Foxconn plant has a variety of benefits written into the law, allowing them to be treated as exceptions to environmental regulation. Here it's somewhat divided, perhaps, but over 50% are either very or somewhat concerned, 29 and 33, that it will affect water or other environmental quality. 18% are only a little concerned, and 14% say they're not at all concerned about those potential environmental impacts of it. So a fair bit of concern, I would say.
Let's run through the questions we just displayed and do this by region, because I think that's where this really begins to get interesting.
Because this is, of course, one of the key issues is for this much public investment from state taxpayers around the state, is it concentrated benefits in just one part of the state? So let's look first at whether you think the project in the end will be worth it or not. And the purple bar here is the Milwaukee suburban counties. And that is actually the only region of the state where fully 52%, a majority, say that the Foxconn project will recoup all of the investment that's being made in it. Interestingly, the city of Milwaukee is quite pessimistic, at just 30% saying that. And Madison, the Madison media market, is the least optimistic about getting the money back. But it's worth noting that especially in Green Bay and in the north and western parts of the state, Northwest includes Wausau, Duluth, Superior, La Crosse, Eau Claire, and the Twin Cities suburbs, that those folks are pretty skeptical too, 37 and 36 versus 50 and 49 who think it will not pay for itself. So if you think of the regional impression here, the one set of real cheerleaders are the folks that live here in the Milwaukee suburbs, and the folks that are in the more distant parts of the state are pretty pessimistic, though in these two cases they're not as pessimistic as Madison and the city of Milwaukee.
A lot of people in different parts of the state feel about whether or not Milwaukee will benefit.
So will Milwaukee benefit? Overwhelmingly, people say, yeah, Milwaukee's going to benefit. Okay? Again, the city is a little skeptical on that. But the suburbs, almost two-thirds, even Madison, which was skeptical on the value, is 51, and Green Bay in the Northwest in the high 50s, 59 and 57, with low values, only 33 and 30 in those two regions, saying it won't benefit. So again, what are you seeing here? In the first slide, across everything, people thought that the area would benefit, but when you break it down a little more finely, you see really substantial belief that this is going to be a project that benefits the Milwaukee area, the greater Milwaukee area.
Again, will businesses near you directly benefit?
So here's the one that you might think would matter, and yeah, it does. If you're in the suburbs, 37% think businesses there in the Milwaukee suburbs think their businesses will benefit directly, but 58% don't think so. Here's a rare turnaround. The city now is in second place here at only 27%, but it is in second place, saying businesses in the city will benefit, though most don't think that. But this is where, again, I think the real interesting result is in both Madison and Green Bay and the Northwest, we're at just about 22 to 17%, 1 in 5, think that their local businesses will benefit from this, and an overwhelming 68, 74, 72 say their local businesses won't benefit. So again, what you're seeing, whether you look at it regionally or statewide, the belief that this will help our region, but a belief that it's not going to help the region, or at least the businesses where folks live, by pretty substantial margins.
And let's stay with this question and break it down by people's their political identification.
Yeah. You will be shocked to know that partisanship plays a role here. And so rather than do my usual and belabor this point forever, I just wanted to show you 2 slides, okay? So here is still sticking with the will businesses near you benefit among Democrats. And, you know, there's much less belief. But again, notice that Milwaukee City is sort of the outlier here, right? Democrats in the city actually are, to the extent anybody's optimistic here, a bit more optimistic. And Democrats everywhere in the state are over 60% saying their local businesses won't benefit. So, all right, you'd expect that. These are Democrats. They're critical, right? So the real payoff is, what are Republicans around the state thinking about this project and whether it will affect them positively or not? And the point is, not so much even among Republicans. Again, the Milwaukee suburbs, unsurprisingly, 54% now think that local businesses here will benefit. Drops off in Madison, but it again drops off a lot in Green Bay and the Northwest. That 25 and 22 among Republicans is only a little bit better than the 22 and 17 we saw a moment ago among everyone. And the belief that their businesses won't is 2 to 1, 2/3 say it won't. So this is an issue going forward about the use of state resources that's going to heavily benefit one region of the state, but at least in the eyes of people elsewhere and even Republicans elsewhere, the idea that this is going to benefit regions outside of our local one is greeted with a lot of skepticism.
We're going to talk about guns for a moment. Back on February 14th, as we all know, 17 people at a high school in Parkland, Florida, were killed by a gunman who went into the school and opened fire. That has reignited the gun debate, I think it's safe to say, and it made us think about whether or not we should be asking some more questions about some of the things that have been discussed in the aftermath of Parkland. Yep. So I'll let you take that.
And sadly, of course, this is an issue that we've had occasion to ask about before. The upshot is, for background checks on private sales or sales at gun shows, we remain with a massive 81% majority saying we should have those kinds of background checks. Got to get these glasses fixed. 16% say that we shouldn't have them. This is not much change from last time. When we asked it in June of 2016, not this past June, but the previous June, it was 85% in favor and 12% opposed. This is one of the questions that we asked half sample, but no matter what the sample size, you would say this does not represent any meaningful change. Still a big majority, very small differences in the absolute percentages as well. But not a big upswing either. At least some other polling nationally has put that number higher, 90% or so, but that could have to do with national sample versus state sample. It could also have to do with question wording. But basically, we're seeing what we've seen here before. The others, the assault weapons ban, or as we put it in the question, a ban on assault-style weapons, since defining what an assault weapon is kind of hard. And here, there's still support, majority support, 58 to 40. And that, too, is about where it was before. It was 54% when we asked in March of 13, so it's just a shade higher now. But again, no substantial movement in that issue either.
You wanted to look at how the attitudes might vary depending on whether or not that household had a gun.
That's right.
Or not.
Here in the state, about 44 or 45% of households say they have a gun in the house or a weapon, gun, rifle, shotgun. About 50-ish plus percent say they don't. About 8 or 9% say they would prefer not to answer the question. When we look at gun households on background checks, 78%, the green over here on the left, 78% of gun-owning households say you should have background checks, essentially for everybody, for private sales. It's higher of the non-gun households, 86, but no matter what, those are giant majorities favoring background checks. And again, no change in this over time. If we move to the assault weapons, though, now we do see quite a split. That in gun households, it's 43 would take a ban on assault-style weapons, 52 would oppose that. Of those without a weapon in the household, it's 69 and 28. So there is more of a split when it comes to banning a particular type of gun, even though the background checks themselves are essentially consensual.
How much skepticism is there, Charles, amongst the people we talk to about whether or not passing this kind of legislation would make a difference in reducing mass shootings?
This seems to be one of the real issues in this debate is, yeah, you could do this, but would it have any effect? So we asked a question of how much do you think new gun control laws could reduce the number of mass shootings in the country? And you see a lot of doubt. Just 12% think that, now we didn't define what kind of gun laws we're talking about, so we're deliberately vague because I think the proposals are vague. But 12% a lot, 22% a moderate amount, 19 a little, but I think the real payoff is here. 43%, 4 in 10, think that it won't have any effect at all. And so whether you're a proponent or an opponent, if there's this much skepticism that it's going to make much difference, then I think that plays into the gun debate as well.
And you want to take a quick look at the numbers that show how many people have guns in the household?
Right. Just quickly, well, this is, help, the same question by whether you have a gun in the household or not. The not at all is very high, 57% with gun households, 28 of non-gun households. Half of non-gun households say that it would make at least some difference, but it's still, I would say, a fair bit, 28 without guns, that's also are very skeptical about it. Here's, do you have a gun or not? I mentioned this a moment ago. 44 say they do have a gun in the household, 48 not, and this is the 7% refused, which is unusual. We get a lot of don't knows. We rarely get refused. So this is substantively telling you that this is a sensitive issue and one that people choose not to reveal whether they do or not have a gun in the household. This is possession of guns in the house by region, and this won't surprise you at all. The North and West, our most rural parts of the state, are the places where guns are most likely to be in the house. Milwaukee City is actually the place where that's least likely. And then the last little bit is the Milwaukee suburbs and Madison are equally likely to have guns in the house at about 39%, so a little less than the statewide average. That's not changed much over time, I should say. We've monitored this for a while.
We asked a few questions about President Trump and how he is doing these days. Let's begin with the president's job approval rating, Charles.
Okay. 43% approve, 50% disapprove. If we go back to June, it was 41-51. So there's a little 2-point change in approval and a 1-point decline in disapproval. if you think back, if anybody can remember this far back to June, that was near his low water mark, which really hit in the late summer. It flattened out, I'm talking nationally now, it's flattened out through the fall and ticked up nationally in December and January and seems to have ticked down a bit most recently. I think we didn't see that trajectory because we weren't in the field during that time, but that national trajectory would fit reasonably well here. Also, these are full sample questions, by the way, but the differences in those percentages is both statistically and practically not important. So he's holding roughly steady.
We asked a few questions about the president's performance. For instance, does President Trump keep his campaign promises?
And here, more than half, or a plurality, 50 to 46, say yes, he does keep his promises. That, again, is consistent with national data. When we asked it before, in June this was, it was 46 said he kept his promises. Now it's 50. In that time, the health care repeal has failed, but the tax bill has been passed. Regulatory changes have been implemented by the administration. So I think the public's responding to that in part by seeing that he is doing these promises. The new trade issues came out while we were in the field, so probably don't have a big influence on these results since it was only the latter part of the week that we were in the field and after he had tweeted something about trade.
Another question we asked, does President Trump care about people like you?
Certainly one of the ideas that he reaches out to people who'd been neglected. 43% say he does care about people like them, 54% don't. And again, if you look at the comparison, that 43 is up just a shade from the 40% in June that said he cares. But a majority both times, 55 then and 54 now, say that does not describe him, that implicitly he doesn't care about them.
Does the president show good judgment?
This is one we've been tracking for a while. 37% say he does, 59% say he does not. Again, when we look at that against June, the 37 is a shade up from the 34 it was in June. The 50 is a shade down. Really, 59 is just a shade down from the 61 that it had been. So again, I think the bottom line you take away from all these slides is the president is basically stabilized or possibly blipped up a point or two on each of these items. This, too, is where not his overall approval, which was full sample, but these questions were half sample. And you say that the half sample didn't make any difference. We're right at the same point that we were with the full sample back in June.
How's the president doing in terms of job approval with Republicans and Democrats?
Well, let me think about that. Maybe we'll give a prize if anybody can give the right answer to that. So this is it. 89 to 8 approval among Republicans, 89 to 9 among Democrats, and independents 34 to 53. Anybody that's been following this cannot be surprised at these results. We do see that even among Republicans that had some qualifications about the president during the campaign, or especially here in the state during the Republican primary that Ted Cruz won, nevertheless, the party here in the state has really strongly aligned behind him. If we broke out independents who lean to a party, among Republicans, that would be up in the 70s, and among Democrats, disapproval would be in the 70s. And so you're seeing parallel here. The leaners are a little less enthusiastic or a little less vitriolic, but they're basically mirror images of each other.
We have a battery of questions about the state of Wisconsin. We begin with whether or not, this is a question we ask almost every poll, whether or not the state is headed in the right direction or whether it's on the wrong track.
Right. As if anybody remembered trains.
Yeah, that's true.
So here we go. 53 right direction, 44 wrong track. That's a shade different from last time. It was 53 last time as well. But the wrong track has ticked up 2 points from 42 to 44. Right direction is held steady at 53. So we're not seeing much of a dynamic. If I could again take you back to June, that was before the budget passed. It was also a little bit before the budget stalemate that ended up running late through the summer occurred. It's also now interviews after most of the current legislative session, and much of the legislation has bubbled through. I think the bottom line is none of that seems to have shifted views of the direction of the state.
And speaking of the budget, is the state budget situation better or worse than it was a few years ago?
Now, call me back. A third would be a pretty good description of this. 31% say it's better now than it was, 35% say it's about the same, and 28% say it's in worse shape. We have seen variation in the past about that. Back in 2015, when we ran into a difficult budget that was criticized among Republicans as well as Democrats, that worst number went up a bit. Recently, it's been roughly where it is now, flat across the categories. And maybe most importantly, the worst number has been holding under 30% for a while.
We ask people, which is more important, cutting property taxes or increasing spending for public schools? Which is more important to you?
A conflict that has driven much of policy making in the governor's office and in the legislature, at least since the beginning of 2011. And here's the number: 33% would say property tax cuts is their most important thing, but 63% say increased spending on public schools is their most important. And after showing you all of this stuff that didn't change, let me show you how this one has changed. If we go back to the first time we asked it in March of 2014, a slight plurality, 49%, preferred their property tax cuts to 46% that preferred more spending for public schools. We didn't say K-12, public schools. And so you can see how much of a difference there is now in where we stand today about property taxes and public school spending, that has shifted a lot over the 4 years since the first time we asked about this. And I think it's reflected in other questions we've asked as well that show a greater concern for K-12 education and support and spending, and less concern about property taxes per se.
Charles, we asked a question about Act 10. That's the piece of legislation passed a number of years ago that eliminated most collective bargaining for most public employees. A couple of questions on that.
Yeah. So this question is, again, one we've asked in the past. It's come up a bit in some of the campaign debate and discussion. The candidate forums have brought it up recently, so it seemed like a good time to revisit it. And so the question we ask is, we remind people that Act 10 largely ended collective bargaining for most public workers in the state. Would you like to see a return to collective bargaining before Act 10 was passed, or would you rather keep the law as it is now? And we're pretty evenly divided, but with 46% plurality saying keep as it is now, 41 say return to collective bargaining. And here the trend over time is only very, very modest. So we go back, we've asked it a number of times, but I'm picking May of 2012, just before the recall, was the first time we asked that particular question. Then the most recent time was October of 14, just before the gubernatorial election, and then now. And you can see that May of 12 and October of 14 were exactly the same, 43-50 in both of those polls. And now both of those numbers have dipped just a little bit, down 2 points to 41, return collective bargaining, but down 4 points on keeping it as it is. What's the difference? The saliency of the issue has gone down, and now a few more people say, I don't know, to this question, whereas in the height of the recall and the debate over Act 10, people were much more opinionated about it. But even so, it's still a very modest shift.
How do people feel about the job that Governor Walker's doing right now?
They're split, 47-47. With 6% don't know. I'm going to nudge you on that 6% don't know in a minute, so you've been warned. 47-47 in June. Oh, well, I guess I'll show it to you this way. In June, it was 48-48. So it's tied. There's really no substantive change at all in that. This is his long-term approval, and you see approval at the time of the recall, approval at the time of the reelect. This is that period of a bad budget and running for president. Then as we come out of 2016 and into 17, you see the disapproval coming down and approval rising. But now they've just met and stuck on one another, and there's not an upward trend for either of them. They're just a tie at this point. So 48-48 or 47-47, essentially the state's pretty divided about him. And almost everybody, that 6%, has an opinion, except for that 6%.
So, of course, the governor is up for re-election in the fall. And there are a lot of Democrats running against him, more than a dozen by my count, probably about 9 that some people in this room may be familiar with. Charles, I guess the bottom line on this is if people are looking for big clues as to how that's going to play out, we may not have that answer for them.
Well, we don't have the answer. The election's a ways off. But what we do have is some information, and that is that these folks are really not well known. We use 9 Democratic candidates who are frequently featured in news stories as the candidates at forums and so on, but we did leave out some that are officially registered with the Elections Board, Elections Commission. So Tony Evers has the lowest don't know rating, but 2 out of 3, 66%, when we ask do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of him, say either I haven't heard enough about him to have an opinion or simply I don't know. I'm combining those two, haven't heard and don't know here. And you can see that that's the most visible of anybody. Paul Soglin, the mayor of Madison's in second place with 71% saying they don't know enough to have an opinion. And I'll let you peruse the rest that are in the 80s and touching 90 in 2 cases. Now, it's a long ways out. It's early in the campaign. And while Evers has run statewide, none of these other folks have statewide experience. Kathleen Vinehout has, of course, run statewide in the recall primary in 2012. But it's not overly surprising that we would see such large levels of non-recognition at this point. On the other hand, this is the beginning of March, and the primary is in the beginning of April, so some of those numbers need to move between now and, I said April, yes, August, of course, August. So some of those will need to move. It's not just a Democratic affair. Here are the 2 Republican Senate candidates at 85 and 83% don't know on them. So regardless of party, voters are not yet tuned in. These campaigns are not yet visible enough with regular Sunday morning TV advertising or enough penetration of public concern about the election for them to become known. In a minute, I'll show you Tammy Baldwin's trend over time, and you'll see how she had to become known at the beginning of her Senate run as well. That will help put these numbers into some perspective. But these are not out of line with what we see with non-incumbent candidates at this stage of a campaign. But I jokingly said we're not going to make a forecast here because it should be obvious now why a question about who you're going to vote for in November just doesn't make much sense when 2/3 to 90% don't have a perception of the challengers at all.
So we did ask about favorability ratings for these candidates, and
we did. And so here are the favorable on the left, unfavorable on the right. You won't believe how hard I had to work to get that legend to fit on the screen. Thank you. And just as Evers was the best known, or the least unknown, he's also has the highest favorable at 20 and unfavorable at 13. You can see Soglin at 15 and 13, but the others are struggling to break through as well here. Flynn at 13 and 8, I think, is the next test. Oh, and that's Vinehout at 12 and 9. But I reiterate, when so many people don't know who these folks are, these favorable and unfavorable ratings are coming from a small sliver of the electorate that are tuned in, are very motivated, may care passionately about some of these candidates. They just represent a tiny fraction of the electorate as of today.
And there's not a lot of awareness about the candidates in the Supreme Court race, who are now about a month away from the big election.
Right. I left off the Republican side of this. Nicholson at 7% and 7 unfavorable, Vinehout at 10 and 6 favorable and unfavorable. And remember, they were both up in the 80s for, what did I say, Vinehout? Boy, is that a mistake. Vootmere, sorry.
But it does,
yes.
but that actually, just one point on that, Charles, it does sort of go to the point that, you know, a lot of people in this room, a lot of people, us in our world, are in this bubble, and everybody thinks that what happens in Madison, everything that goes on in Madison is of great interest. And I mean, there are people there who've been doing this for a while, and people don't know much about them.
And again, I just want to stress that that is 100% normal. The job of the campaign is to introduce yourself, and we're still a long ways out in that introductory process. So you should, if I left you with only one message today, is to realize how early we are in the process at this stage, and things could therefore break any direction when nobody has a really substantial advantage in name recognition. Granted, Evers at 2/3 who don't know him. Now, finally, let's go to the Supreme Court candidates. And even though they just finished, and both just finished first and second in a statewide primary, it's still 77 and 81 that can't recognize either of them. When we look at the favorability for them, Dallin has a little bit of an advantage, 14 to 9. Skrinock is 10 and 9 on that. But the same story, these are tiny, tiny shares of the electorate that have well-formed opinions of them.
That poll, of course, was before the big debate we had here Friday night.
It was before the debate.
I'm sure that's changed those numbers considerably.
Magnificently changed since then.
Yeah. We wanted to touch on which party primary voters said they were going to participate in, because this starts to get at this whole enthusiasm, this notion of enthusiasm in this election cycle.
And as you know, we have open primaries here in the state. Oh, what was that? Oh, I forgot this. I'm sorry. This is Tammy Baldwin's favorability over time in the context of trying to go through the candidates and their favorability. And you can see that her favorable and unfavorable numbers have bounced around and been roughly equal. Right at the moment, she's 2 points more unfavorable than favorable. There's been maybe a little bit of shift in that over the last 12 months. I promised you I wanted you to see that 50% could not recognize her at the beginning of the 12 campaign, and you see how that number came down sharply as we got to Election Day, and that I did want to point out to you, because that's what happens when you're not an incumbent candidate.
Okay. My mistake on that. Yep. Which party primary will you vote?
About evenly divided. 32 say they'll vote in the Republican, 35 say in the Democratic primary. Notice that that's, at least in the margin of those two, about where our leaners, party with leaners, divide. But 17% won't vote, 13% say they don't know if they'll vote, 2% insist that they can vote in both primaries simultaneously. So I'm sure they'll work that out in August. I do want to say that we did not require people who call themselves Democrats to vote in the Democratic primary or vice versa, but almost everybody sorted themselves that way. Independents split between going to the Dem and Rep, but you'll see if you go to the crosstabs, there's this tiniest of tiny numbers, like one person, I think, who's a Democrat voting in the Republican primary at this point. So we're looking almost entirely at partisans plus independents who choose to vote in their primary. These are not affected by any kind of crossover vote. So, and those numbers, 32 and 35, also tell you why our sample size is small on the primary vote, is because barely a third of voters are voting in either of the two primaries. When we did that, here's the result for the Democratic primary preference. And there's one really big number over here. 44% say they don't know who they'll vote for. So in addition to not knowing much about the candidates, people are not locked into any of those candidates. Evers has the highest at 18. Nobody else is in double digits. Soglin at 9 and Flynn at 7 are the second and third place. But I'm pretty confident nobody's going to finish second with 9% and nobody's going to win with 18%. So again, my point about why this is so premature, we don't know how these races are going to turn out when nobody knows these folks. But this guy is really killing it.
Same is true for the Republican U.S. Senate primary.
Oddly enough, it is. 49% don't know how they'll vote there. And you can see that here, Nicholson's at 29 and 19. I'm going to say it right this time. 19. 19. I will point out just one little geeky oddity. Vukmir had a slightly better favorable, unfavorable than Nicholson did. So why is Nicholson leading here? Granted, tiny, tiny numbers, way inside the margin of error, caveat, caveat, caveat. But here's the really cool result. Of people who can't identify either candidate, Nicholson wins 22-7. So I don't have an answer for why that might be, but it does go a long ways to explain why you can have a discrepancy between very little known folks with no favorability and a sort of strong break among that group that say they'll vote in the Republican primary.
One of the big narratives in this election year has been enthusiasm. Which party has enthusiasm? I think there's been some belief that Democrats have had the greater enthusiasm in recent elections. What do we find in terms of enthusiasm?
We certainly saw evidence in the special election in Senate District 10 and here in Assembly District 58. And there does turn out to be some enthusiasm. 53% say they're very enthusiastic about voting this fall. 32 somewhat, and then the low levels drop off quite a bit. But when we break it down by party, it's am I reading that right? Yes, 64% Democratic high enthusiasm versus 54 high enthusiasm for Republicans. Independents are always less enthusiastic about politics than partisans, and they're down here, and then you can see the others drop off as well. But this is a notable advantage. If we try to put that in perspective, let's go back to the last midterm, the March of 2014 poll. And now it was Republicans at 55% very enthusiastic and Democrats all the way down at 52. So that gap between 52 and 64 can go a very long way to explaining the surge we saw in the two special elections that moved towards the Democrats. And raises the question, though, of why we're not seeing the party trend move in that same direction. So that's still part of the puzzle of the partisan balance. But you can make up for an awful lot if you have a 10-point advantage in enthusiasm and therefore turnout.
We have a few questions about immigration in this poll. We thought it was timely. March 5th was supposed to be the day that Congress came up with a solution to figure out what to do with the Dreamers. That obviously has not happened yet. But we asked a series of questions here, Charles, beginning with what should happen to undocumented workers in this country, people who are working in this country. We gave a series of options to the respondents, and what did we find? How do people feel about that?
Here, there's strong support for current undocumented but people in a job to have a path to citizenship, stay and have some kind of possibility of citizenship. 71% support that. 14% say they could stay, but only as temporary guest workers. And then finally, 9% say they should be required to leave the U.S. We've tracked this really since 2012, since we first started the poll. And as with national polling, we've consistently found the path to citizenship in the high 50s and low 60s. The fact that it has risen to 71 now is also in keeping with national data that shows that despite the current deadlock on immigration, if anything, the public has moved more in the direction of permanent residence with mostly a path to citizenship or some kind of guest status. But this is up a few percentage points from where we were last year and up even more from a couple of years ago.
And I mentioned the Dreamers. These are these young folks who were brought to the country illegally by their parents and have essentially grown up here in America. We asked what their future should be.
We asked a very similar question with a little adjustment to the wording. What about undocumented residents who were brought here as children and grew up here? Should they be allowed to stay with a path to citizenship, stay permanently but not have a citizenship option, or be required to leave the country? And that's 86% in favor, 8% permanent resident, 4% required to leave. Hardly a surprise, again, national polling consistently shows that this group is a more sympathetic group even than the substantial numbers of a path to citizenship. And not unlike the gun issue, also shows a case where Congress is deadlocked on a policy move, even though very large majorities, at least in these two categories, as well as the background checks, are there as a matter of public opinion, but it's hard for Congress to find a way to get a majority to pass legislation.
President Trump has said that any immigration solution is going to have to include money for a border wall with Mexico. How do people feel about a border wall with Mexico?
Not that great. 37% in favor, 59 opposed. This really hadn't changed. Whereas the view on immigrants has gotten a little bit more favorable. We've asked this a few times in 2016. And it's stayed in roughly that same range, mid-30s to mid to low 50s for and against. So we're not seeing a trend on that.
We're going to close with a few questions about the Russia investigation, possible Russian influence on the 2016 election. We begin, Charles, with a question about Robert Mueller, the special prosecutor, special counsel who has been overseeing this investigation. Is he, do people believe he's going to conduct a fair and impartial investigation?
They're divided, Mike.
Yeah.
There you go. So how much confidence do you have? 24 are great deals, 22 some, 46% there. 20 helps, 20% only a little, 23, 43 together, not at all. So we're really very split on this issue. It has shifted just a little, and 10% don't know. It has shifted a little bit, so this is last June. If I use the miracle of animation here, this is now, this is then. It's not so much the great deal has changed, but the folks in this category really went down and kind of spread out into other categories. So there's more doubt now than there was, but it's not so much in the no confidence, which bumped up too, but into the only a little, I think. And look at the don't know over here now and 11 then. There's still a fair number of people, that 10% at least, that don't have an opinion about this.
Party ID?
By party ID? Golly. I'd look at the ends here to get the message, though. Very few Republicans have a great deal of confidence. A third, not a majority, but a third have no confidence at all. On Democrats, it's 43% who have a great deal of confidence and 12% no confidence at all. Party polarization certainly enters in here, but this is a case where party leadership, both in the Congress and in the White House, are making strong arguments about this. So it's not at all surprising that partisans will be influenced by that. If anything, I'd go back to the immigration and the background checks as examples where that partisan effect is much reduced. It's not that it doesn't exist, but when you get super majorities there, it obviously means that a lot of people in every party are going with the majority view. So it's maybe worth it to note that background checks and immigration actually do have a lot of support in both parties, but not so here, where that overt partisanship really has split the opinions about the investigation.
So the word of the moment is tribal. So maybe our final question, that will be another display of that. How concerned about possible Russian influence attempts in the 2016 election are you? How concerned are you about that?
And this comes on the heel of the news story last week, alleging at least an attempt on
Russians,
in charges and also in the Wisconsin elections data. So 33% are very, 22 not much, so put those together, 55. But 26 not at all, and 19 not too much, 45. So again, we're pretty divided. There's a little more concern than non-concern, but it's still a little bit more concerned. And again, when we look at it, Republicans are very little bothered by Russian interference. Democrats are very excited about it, very worried about it. And then exactly the opposite on the not at all concerned. So this issue really does break down very strongly on those partisan lines. Again, I would allege because of political leadership, which has made this an issue with partisan overtones, as opposed to a unified national security message, which you could imagine in a different world might unify the parties on this. But not now.
Rather than try and squeeze in a question or two, I'll give you a moment or two, Charles, here to just put it all in perspective. What's the takeaway on this poll?
We started with Foxconn because I do think it, of all the things we've talked about, is maybe the most important part of the conversation statewide, because it goes to the perception that Catherine Kramer at UW-Madison has written about, of folks outside of the major metro areas and especially the Southeast seeing their regions being ignored and disadvantaged relative to the Milwaukee area and the Madison area in particular, though I might toss in metro areas in general, versus the rural areas. So when you see those Foxconn numbers that show skepticism about the value of all this statewide taxpayer dollars going into something, coupled with the perception that just this region benefits, and coupled the third time with the notion that the businesses near you don't benefit, I think that's an important public policy question, aside from the politics of it, because it does raise the question of how public dollars that come from everyone can be targeted for purposes within regions, but if that targeting is regionally divisive and people see that they're not getting their benefits, I think that is a big problem for how the state spends its money and how it distributes the benefits from that. You'll need to talk to an economist about the ultimate impacts of this, but I think from a political point of view, whether we're unified as a state that sees general benefits or whether we're divided that sees only those folks down there getting theirs, I think is a big deal. If I could just say for the election side, you look at a governor who's got a dead even 47-47 approval. You don't need to run a horse race against that to say that looks like probably a fairly competitive election, but much depends on who emerges from this field of heavily unknown candidates. And the same thing on the Senate side. Senator Baldwin, at a couple of points underwater on favorability, is in a pretty decent position. But again, it depends on whether one of these two unknown Senate candidates breaks out and runs an effective campaign, how her campaign and how Governor Walker's campaign runs. So I really want to stress the idea that it's premature to be too concerned about these things. I'd pay attention to approval and favorability, maybe the right direction, wrong track. I'm not a huge fan of that item, but some people love it and think it's really indicative. So that one's a little bit better, for the governor at least, at 53 right direction. But we're a long ways from November, so chill.
Mm-hmm. And more polls to come. Well, this is
I'm quitting.
This is it.
Anymore,
This is the swan song right here. Retire undefeated. That's right.
Yeah, we'll be back.
You'll be back with more coming up. We'll be
Yes.
active again this fall and this summer. And so thanks very much again for being with us. We'll see you again next time for the next forum.